hot topic of debate that we want to talk about, which everybody seems to be talking about, is the Renters Reform Bill. Hi, I'm Julian Ferrier from Pearson Ferrier Estate Agents. We are one of the larger independent letting agents based in the Northwest and have been for over 25 years now. We are trying to dig into the detail, establish the background, try and find out what is going to go on, mainly to give comfort to our existing landlords and maybe reach out to those people who are contemplating being a landlord. What do we know? What can we tell you? What are the answers? What are the questions? Or maybe that's back to front, who knows? What we do know is changes are going to happen, and the government did their own research into the private rental sector. And if I'm being honest with you, looking at the research that the government's produced, which is fundamentally not biased or opinionated, it just seems to go into detail and facts. There's not really a great deal wrong with the private rental sector. In fact, there are over 4.5 million properties in the private rental sector, and around about 19% of the population in England rent. So it's a safety net that the government, to some extent, doesn't need to concern themselves with. The private rental sector provides a service. It provides housing for private people in the UK that don't rely on the government fundamentally. There are a handful of tenants in the private rental sector who may be on benefits, who may make some form of claim for housing. But fundamentally, the makeup of people in that sector is people who work. Now, statistics show that only 5% of tenants in the private rental sector are currently in arrears, as opposed to 15% in social housing. The stats say, by the government's own information again, over 70% of private tenants are comfortable with the rent that they pay. What exactly is broken with the PRS, and what are the government actually trying to fix? I think with many things, most things in life are problem-free and, dare I say it, possibly a little bit boring. If we switch on the news at night and it was all good news, we'd switch off. So we need the bad news. That's how it works. So 5% of the problems take up 95% of everyone's time. Speaking from experience in our business, it's exactly the same. So where do we go with the next steps in terms of the reform bill? What changes are going to come into effect, and how will it affect you going forward by the time we hit summer 2025, when this legislation comes into force? In a recent discussion, a heated discussion between Kemi Badenoch and Angela Rayner, they have obviously differing opinions on what may or may not come to force when the Renters Reform Bill comes into power. One of the extreme comments that Angela Rayner made was that there are millions of tenants living under the threat of eviction, when actually information produced by the government says that most tenants end their contracts because they want to move. Around 9% are asked to leave and 10% left by mutual agreement. So what is the problem again that's trying to be fixed? You know, in terms of what Angela Rayner said, it seems to contradict research that was carried out by the government. I mean, it's, you know, obviously the Conservative government, but the research was carried out between 2022 and 2023. These seem to be facts, not opinion. So when we go forward into the summer of 2025, what are the key things that we're trying to pick through and make sure we are planning ahead for our existing database of landlords, but also reaching out to our yet-to-be landlords who may be coming on board over the next 6 to 12 months. Clearly, there is a huge demand for people to rent in both social and the private rental sector. Figures produced again, our population has risen by another 1%. Interesting facts on a curveball are that since 2020, there has been a reduction of 170,000 properties in the private rental sector. Why is that? Why are people stepping away from the sector? You'd have to get 170,000 different opinions to establish what those facts were. But going forward, the demand for property remains high. So what is it, and what is the benefit in abolishing what we now know is the Section 21 notice? A Section 21, or as people call it, a no-fault eviction, is a notice that a landlord serves when they want to end a tenancy. So what are the reasons for a no-fault eviction? A landlord may be working overseas, maybe working in a different part of the country, and just want to move back into the house. Well, what's wrong with that? Providing you give the tenant sufficient notice and the notice is 2 months, for me, okay, it may seem unfair the tenant's got to move out, but there are used alternatives for them, and the landlord moving back in, it may just be for personal reasons. The property may have been rented out for decades. We've got landlords who've been clients of ours for over 25 years. At some point, these landlords reach a stage where they no longer want to be landlords. I want to turn those properties into cash so that they can supplement their retirement. That seems to me to be a genuine reason. So Section 21 is going to be abolished no matter what. So what does that mean? At a recent Property Mark conference I attended, the suggestion is that the Section 8 notice will be amended, and that will be somehow the go-to notice that landlords will have to serve should they want to end the tenancy. The Section 8 currently is usually issued where the tenant has breached their tenancy, failure to pay their rent on time, not paying the rent at all, being antisocial, or some other contradiction of their tenancy agreement, which means the landlord wants to end the tenancy because, quite frankly, the tenant's behaviour has become unacceptable. So the Section 8 will be the go-to notice for tenants. One of the suggestions based on the Property Market Conference is that where we can currently serve notice when a tenant goes 2 months in arrears, it may be you can no longer serve a notice after 2025 until a tenant's 3 months in arrears, which seems to exaggerate the problem. One of the problems that we have is, and also the notice that you've got to serve is not a 2-month notice, it's a 4-month notice, which then means, well, that's 7 months before we go to court. Anybody who's had any dealings with the court system, and no disrespect to the courts, we understand they are under pressure, we understand they're overworked, they're probably understaffed, and they're probably underfunded. The current court system doesn't work. It's not fit for purpose. The various governments have said they're going to invest in technology, they're going to improve the court system, but having experienced it myself over the last 18 months, to try and get a tenant out is not easy and can take between 6 to 12 months. During that time, a property can deteriorate, arrears can accrue. So it does feel as though many of the problems, in inverted commas, that successive governments seem to think are a problem are more tenant focused than landlord focused. Yet it seems to be that the legislative change that are going to come into power seem to penalise landlords. It genuinely feels like the landlords who are out there, the private rental sector of over 4.5 million properties, which has a value of £1.5 trillion in capital terms, are more of the solution than the problem. And if I was in government, not that I would dream of being in government, you probably would want to embrace these people. They are the cure, not the disease. Let's work with these people rather than against them. And what legislation have they discussed in depth with the private rental sector? I understand various people in and around various sectors of housing have been involved in this debate, but how much debate was really focused on, for argument's sake, Property Mark, we are subscribers of. We follow their ethics, we follow their guidelines, we follow their codes. So really, is the private rental sector broken? Does it need fixing? And when the legislation comes in, who will it really benefit?